starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, hey everybody. We are excited to be here with Lee Warren today from Earthaven, and we're going to have just a fun time and having a discussion with her about what they're doing there at Earthaven and what her life is about a little bit. And we are going to start recording soon if we haven't. Mark, have we done that yet? All right, cool. We've got Mark behind the glass, as we say in Bangladesh. Mark has been with me for a number of years and almost like a son of mine. And then Arib, I'm not sure whether Arib's on. Are you on, Arib?
I am on. Hey guys.
Cool. Arib is in Pakistan and right next door to Afghanistan, and we had some discussions about that earlier today. So a little bit of the world situation we'll discuss. And then Sierra is in Ohio, and she's one of our senior staff folks, and she is on with us today too.
Hey everyone.
So Lee, first tell us where Earthaven is, because the members of our audience and people who watch the replay probably won't know physically the location.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and thanks for everything y'all are doing to think about pioneering ways of sanity, towards sanity and holism. So really just appreciate what you're doing, and thank you. I'm excited about this conversation. Earthaven is an eco-village, and it's located in western North Carolina. So North Carolina is quite a big state, and in the western part, we're in the Appalachian Mountain Range. And the big city in western North Carolina is Asheville, which is actually more like a town. It's a pretty small city. There's about 120,000 people in the county. And our eco-village is located at about an hour southeast of Asheville. And we bought the land in 1994, and it's about 329 acres. We occupy the traditional lands of the Catawba and the Cherokee peoples. And yeah, that's where we're located on the map.
And let's just literally use a time frame here. Acquired in 1994, is the full intent to start a intentional living location at that time, or did the founders not really know what they were going to do?
Well, they did have a big, ambitious vision, and they bought the land with the intention of starting an eco-village. And there were many waves of people who came immediately at that time, and then for years after, and are still showing up, that are sort of co-creating the project. And at this point, 25 years on, there's a lot of systems that are in place, but it's a continual process. I often think about building an eco-village like a 400-year cathedral, right? So there's some big cathedrals in Europe, like the Notre Dame, that took almost 300 years to build. And I see that as our journey, right? We're in the very first 25 years of a journey that's going to take us hundreds of years.
Very cool. And if we were down the road that 300 years, what would you like to at least have it look like? What would we be seeing 300 years from now?
That's a beautiful question. I'd say, fully bioregionally integrated is how I think I would say that. And what I mean by bioregionality is that we are inhabiting a place, and we are literate about that place, and we are a reciprocal part of the more than human world, right? So instead of extraction from an ecosystem, we are localized, we have a custodial or stewardship mindset, we are place-based, we have, as we're giving as much as we're getting. And that's a relearning, right? That's a relearning the art of appropriate participation and how to be a human on this planet, how to have a healing influence instead of a destructive or destroying, damaging influence. So bioregional regeneration is how I sort of think about it, refitting the patterns of the human to the sort of biological, geological, physical patterns that we're given as this amazing gift by being born into this place.
And now we'll just take it back to the present, 25 years in. One of the ways I would see that you probably influence both the people that are there at Earthaven and your neighbors is by getting to know the neighbors. Tell us a little bit about the neighborhood, the neighbors, and how do they interact with Earthaven, and how have you intentionally sort of created that interaction with them?
Well, that's a fabulous question. These are so dynamic. I love this. So in our case, we're in a really rural county of North Carolina. For example, the county that most of our land is called Rutherford County, and it's considered a distressed county. There's a lot of distressed, challenged counties all along rural Appalachia. And it's got, twice the national poverty rate. It's got 2/3 of the market income. It's got unemployment rate that's twice the national average. So things are hard in the rural counties of our country, certainly in Appalachia. In our rush to industrialize, rural America sort of became a place of poverty, right? And addiction and extraction and a population decrease. So we are inhabiting rural America and hopefully in a different and more reparative way, in a less exploitive and less extractive way. And let me just pause and say, we need tens of thousands of these projects all over the world. There is not, there's some patterns and some systems that can be replicable, but really, we need to return to the village on every scale. And this is our version of it. There's no perfect way to do it. And in our case, we really, those of us who are there and who've been committed to this project for a long time, really value the idea of being in rural America, right? Because many of us believe that in rural America lie the vestiges of having a land-based life, right? Knowing how to get along with each other, taking care of each other, taking care of the land, doing some sort of relationship to agriculture, ideally sustainable and regenerative and resilient agriculture, maybe small town governance systems. So, a lot of where we are is us trying to move from this place of what my dear friend calls, we're suburban and urban refugees, into some sort of literacy with how to live, how to keep ourselves alive, and how to keep the world around us in a healthy way.
At this point in time, right now, how many people are living there? And is that a number that's fairly stable? Is it increasing, or what's that stat?
Yeah, so there's about 75 adults and 25 children in our Ecovillage, which is sort of under the auspices of what we call the Homeowners Association or our Ecovillage Association. And then there's a bunch of people who live around and nearby us who aren't necessarily part of the actual intentional legal structure. So that figure is maybe another 50 to 75 people. So and within the legal auspices of the community, we hope to double the size we're at now. So, it's conceivable that our extended family, or what we consider the village, could be, somewhere in the 300 to 500 range at some point in the future.
And is your living quarters area in a centralized or location? 300 and some acres is quite large, or do you live out and about on the land?
Yeah, we've identified 13 different neighborhoods within the community, and these neighborhoods are comprised of roughly 10 to 12 acres each, and each of these neighborhoods has their own infrastructure, including, utility systems, their own accounting systems, their own decision-making systems. So they're sort of communities within communities. And that might be one of the mistakes that we made early on, is to spread out too far and too fast. but it's the design that we have at this time, with each of the neighborhoods having its own legal structure within the eco-village, and usually having their own farms and gardens and other sources of agriculture, and their own sort of flavors and temperaments and personalities. We really tried to use an ecological, design model, permaculture model, and many of us, use that system. The community is completely off the electric grid, so we provide all of our own utilities on site. We're not tapped into anybody else's systems. We create our own water systems, our own electric systems through solar panels and micro hydro, and everything that's happening is utility-wise is happening within the community. But different neighborhoods are choosing to do that in different ways. So in some ways, the neighborhood models is a really great way to enhance autonomy and individual creativity, while there also is this sort of collective overarching umbrella of what we're here doing together.
So of those communities about how many people in each of the communities?
Oh, it varies. Some of the neighborhoods have 25 or 30 people, and some of the neighborhoods have 2 or 3 or 5. So okay. They're at different stages of development. Because our community is an independent income community, we each come with our own source of income or have to create it. And then, these infrastructure components take a lot of time and money and creativity. And so each of them are at different stages of their development.
And with your model, who is the land owned by?
Well, the neighborhoods are deeded out and therefore own their neighborhoods collectively. So in most cases, and in my neighborhood, we own it through a legal cooperative. People in the Northeast are very familiar with cooperatives. There's some in New York City, but we own everything, all the infrastructure together, and then we have an occupancy agreement for the place that we reside in. So that's the legal structure of the neighborhoods. Mostly they fall under this legal cooperative with a couple of exceptions. And then the land that is not owned by the neighborhoods is owned collectively by the homeowners association. That is that we all sit on the board of and make the collective decisions with.
And how did you end up there 20 years ago? What was a little bit of your history prior to that, and what attracted you?
Yeah, well, I sort of grew up in an immigrant family. So my grandparents and great-grandparents spoke the old language and had a lot of the old traditions. And in my case, it was from Italy and from Eastern Europe. And so I grew up with a pretty robust food culture. We ate together a lot of home cooking, a lot of gardening in the backyard. And then, as with most immigrant families, I was encouraged to go to college and, become more fully Americanized. And I did. And I also just felt like, gosh, this core connection to the land and to each other feels like really a huge miss in our culture. So by my mid-20s, I had found my way back to community, to a land-based community. So by the time I was somewhere in the 25 to 27 years old, I was living in community and exploring, visiting different communities. And then I sort of settled at a community in Virginia for a while. And then I moved to Earthaven in my early 30s at this point. It's over 20 years ago. And so, how I first discovered communities at the time was through the Foundation for Intentional Communities, which is, excuse me, the FIC. Their website is ic.org, and I love their website because they have a really robust database and search engine for people looking for communities, where you can plug in all kinds of different criteria into the search engine and come up with a list of communities that might be aligned with your values and your vision. So at the time, there wasn't a database online. It was the early 90s. There was a big fat book called the Communities Directory. And in it, I found a bunch of communities that were aligned with who I wanted to be associated with. And I went and visited them, and I traveled all over the country, and I visit a lot of these communities, and I lived in several of them. And then I learned so much in those few years of what I wanted and what I didn't want. And then I found Earthaven, and I said, this is the place that I want to commit to and settle in and I on and learn from and grow with these people. And that's where I settled, and I've been there ever since.
Very cool. And a family situation, married, kids, and so on?
I have been married. I'm not currently, and I think of myself as the archetype of a community builder. Actually, I've come to believe, at least for myself, that the pair bond model has sort of run its course, that it's not that sustainable, at least for me and for many of the people I know, and that building, beautiful, supportive, nurturing community, including intimacy in varying forms, has been way more satisfying and sustainable for my life. So that's what I tend to invest in at this point, and have moved away from the idea of a pair bond model.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Of the residents, how many of you make your livings entirely from some activity that is within the community, within Earthaven, versus having a job or whatever you would want to call it that was outside of the physical portion of the community?
Yeah, I love the conversation about economics, and I know that's where you all are oriented as well. Let me take that question to a little bit of a meta level, which is, sustainable economics is such a huge question in projects like these. Like, how do we create a viable economic structure, right? Especially when those of us who are coming from the world are, sort of over the financial wizardry and sort of the toxic nature of how economics has unfolded in our lives and in the world. So this is a huge conversation, and I love this conversation, actually. I'm sure you're very familiar with the B Corp or triple bottom line idea of people, planet, and profit, right? Or the permaculture motto, which is earth care, people care, and fair share. And the way I talk about it is sort of the three-legged stool of sustainability, which is it's got to be ecologically sound, socially interdependent, and economically prosperous. And so I'd say on the economic leg of this particular stool is where we struggle the most in our Ecovillage, and probably many Ecovillage projects do around the world, or community projects, because we're sort of not really willing to play the game that our culture has given us around the society that's obsessed with profit only, right? Corporations with no responsibility, natural resource depletion, social inequities, the destruction of the environment, all the hullabaloo, right? Which is why you're doing what you're doing. And so it's really, how do we forge a sustainable system where people can make a living and feel good about it, a values-based life, things like living wages and valuing small businesses and right livelihood, and thinking about components of the gift economy, mutual aid, fair trade, those kinds of things. So lots to say about all of that. And to your question, which is how are people making their money? I don't have, the specific numbers breakdown, but there's a group of folks who are retired and they live on pension and Social Security and savings from their life of work. There are certainly folks that telecommute, that have jobs, corporate or other nonprofit jobs that work online. I'd say there's a large majority of people that live simply and sort of do a gig economy or piece their lives together, including, a little bit of paid work, growing their own food, building their own house so they don't have a big mortgage, doing some bartering and exchanging, and just live a very simple life. And I'd say there's a lot of satisfaction in that kind of life. And then, right, how many people are employed on the land, either through businesses that other people have created or through businesses that they've created. There's, a group of people that are doing that as well.
So a very weird question, maybe, maybe not. If there was a catastrophic event that occurred in the near future that required everybody, not just Earthaven, but to be very self-sufficient in their living circumstances, how would Earthaven fare?
I mean, better than the average Jill or Joe, but I don't know that I don't think we could keep ourselves alive. We're not there yet. I mean, on a given day, somebody who's really invested in being in the garden all the time, maybe growing 90% of their family's food during that particular season, and it may drop down to 50% of their family's food in the winter months. But that might be, someone who's very committed to agriculture. It's probably 3/4 of the people that live at Earthaven are relying on the grocery store for some, significant 25% of their food every week, if not more. So we're in a long, slow journey towards a cohesive life. I think what we've realized over time is there's not one goal here. The idea that we could feed ourselves if the system went down. I mean, if the system went down, we'd have larger problems, which is we don't have a bunch of guns and ammunition. So we wouldn't last long, right? And so the idea is, how do we become bioregionally interdependent in a way that makes a safety net for the long term? So if the system collapses today, then I think we need to figure out how to die well. And we do a lot of that too. We do a lot of conscious dying conversations. We teach conscious dying at the community. It's the idea of, how do we regenerate culture? How do we not reach one short-term goal as fast as we can, but how are we regenerating all aspects of culture?
So that we talked about that question related to, and your answer related to it would be that two things that you'd struggle with, and you had to be completely self-sufficient. One is food, the other is security, that you mentioned. What else? It sounds like you've got your power needs covered, right? You've got utilities. Water, I saw water, I saw a stream going through and such. Would you have a water problem at all? Or is your water fairly secure coming from on-site? It couldn't be polluted from outside, and so on. What else? What are other things that you have to do a little better job of to get?
Well, I mean, yes. So we do provide all of our own water from the site. We are water rich. We live in the temperate rainforest here in Western North Carolina. We get more rainfall than I imagined you could even imagine. Probably 90 inches this, maybe even so this year. It's a lot of water. And in terms of being off-grid electrically or with utilities, I mean, yes, we are scrappy and we've done a lot of it ourselves and the systems are there, but we rely on, big box stores to get our plumbing supplies and, fix our inverters and send them off to the companies. And we're very well aware that we're very reliant on the systems that exist. And we're not under no illusion that we could exist without them. And again, the goal isn't to really get there in the short term. There's so many pieces to rely on. So if the systems went down, we would probably be able to keep our electrical systems online to some extent, but to what end? What would we need power for in some ways, to run our pumps and to run this and that. But a lot of it is because we're connected to the outside world as well. And food systems, they're slow. It's hard to come from a middle class educated background and then become a farmer. It's a lot of hard work and it's a huge transition. So again, that's a multi-generational process.
Within the community broadly, and then within your neighborhoods inside the community, do those neighborhoods share to where one community might have a very nice tractor and only uses it, so this is the sharing economy mentality, quite honestly, only uses it X amount of time. So that tractor then also gets used by other neighborhoods for other parts of its livelihood. By the way, if you've watched or heard anything about me and us, you know that that's a huge pet peeve of mine, is that almost all of our very high asset value, high value assets get underused. And equipment is certainly one, land is another one in many cases. But anyway, is that a element of your lifestyle and economy, which is sharing?
Yes, we actually share a tractor in the whole entire community. So like we have one tractor and we sign it out, and there's group maintenance processes, and we pay per, use hour. So that's actually, we do that well. That one's on the plus side. And then for a more extensive equipment like track hoe, excavator, earth moving machines, we've had people own them individually and then run a little business where they are working for other people and getting paid by the hour to pay their, to pay their fees for their track hoe excavator. Or we sometimes rent those, right? If we're going to be doing a big project, so some individual is going to clear a path for their house site, they would hire someone who then rents the excavator, that kind of thing. So yes, I think as much as possible, we're trying to share those big items. And hence the neighborhoods are also doing that. Like my neighborhood, we have our lawnmowers that we're doing. I mean, I live in a co-housing neighborhood. We created common wall buildings. So we're actually pretty collaborative, even in our infrastructure. So we have 2 buildings that house sometimes up to 20, 25 people, and we share a lot in common. We share a plumbing system, and all our utility systems in common. We have each of the individual apartments have their own kitchens, but a couple of them don't. And then we share a big common space. We share a big common garden area. So a lot of that is happening, and it's brilliant. I mean, there's a lot of benefit to it, and the more that people share together like that, the more they have to negotiate and navigate relationship, and often that means conflict. Because people have different visions about what they want to see, and so navigating and working through conflict is a pretty big ongoing piece.
By the way, everybody, we're about a little bit less than halfway into our talk here today. Please throw any questions that you have, comments, questions for Lee, for any of us here, and just throw those into the question area. Because I can think of questions forever. I love the whole concept of intentional community. I happen to live, Lee, in a place where I do have control of all those things needed to stay alive: water, food, shelter, energy. And if things went bad, the only thing that I really still struggle with is security. And we actually have that, because we live in a box canyon, and if we just put a little bit more time into it, we would be able to have that security handled also. And right now, there's only 8 of us that live on 150 acres, 160 acres. We have probably 25 people who come in here and work, because we operate what we call an ecological business community. So we have a variety of different businesses that relate to, and we think regenerate, our land and our water. And we're learning all about that all the time. But again, in a crisis, in a bad situation, the only thing I would worry about that we would need is security, honestly. We wouldn't live the same way we live now. But certainly we're not, signing ourselves into any kind of a death situation. We could live here. And we think this particular area could support about 250 people, a lot more than what we have. Now, the biggest reason the food side is covered is we have an abundance of fish. And so the protein that we would get from fish, and they are completely regenerative in terms of, year after year after year after year, if we just manage them properly. And we have wild game, that are in abundance also. Plus, we have alpacas that we think are sort of the best earth-friendly livestock because they can be eaten, they can have clothing made out of them, and their manure can be used as fertilizer right out of their butts. So they're very earth-friendly, and where they're native is in places in the world that are some of the most impoverished places in the world, in the Andes, in the high Andes areas where people are very self-sufficient. But anyway, bottom line is we don't have the scale of people that you have, but we have, we've handled some of those issues. But leaving Earthaven, leaving my place for a little bit, can you think of, because you study this, any place in the world right now that would be sort of the best model for intentional living that's been around a while?
Yeah, I mean, just to speak to what you're saying before I go there, I think we need all kinds of reasons and all kinds of motivations to experiment with this idea of culture regeneration or culture repair. And you're coming at it from the perspective of let's, be able to survive the boom and bust of the, of the unsustainable economy. And that's an awesome place to enter, right? That's a great place to enter. And we need all of the places to enter. Just to say a little bit more about where Earthaven is, like, we don't really have the prepper, or survivalist mentality. It's not where our heads are at. I think, more of where we're coming from is, hey, this global and industrial experiment is at an end point. Whether that end point is now or in 2 weeks or in 20 years or in 200 years, we're at an end point in this experiment. So we need to create the social and physical and economic infrastructure to be able to create culture and systems and, again, bioregionality so that we can carry on when that thing collapses. Not because we're afraid we personally won't survive, because I don't know that that's as relevant, but that if human culture is going to survive, we need to start studying and putting these things in place so that we can create these decentralized, people-centered, place-based means of engaging with the world. We have wisdom traditions that we look at, right? Whether that's indigenous peoples or traditional peoples who lived in sync with the natural world for tens of thousands and more years. And they were stewards of this beautiful place. So I think that's really more our motivation. Is like, if I personally die in the process of creating this 400-year cathedral, that's fine. The point really for me and for many of us at Earthaven is, how do we create the systems that are going to survive us? Because if things really do collapse in the super short term, like, I'm not sure that it matters who survives, or I'm not sure that, yeah. I think we're hoping for a longer, slower descent so that these systems intact systems can emerge. And back to your question, gosh, I don't know that there's one place that we can point to, because, again, bioregionality is specifically about the people, the place, and the project, right? And every one of those things, like you're saying, it's a sacred journey, right? You're doing fish and you're doing water and you're doing survival stuff in a place that is very specific. And there's a lot to be learned from each other. So this idea that there's one model, I think that sort of comes from our mindset of like, who's going to win the prize, as opposed to how do we create these ecologically adaptive systems, and then how do we share the successes and the failures. I often talk about, I could write a book about what not to do, and I think that would be an informative and powerful book. Like, hey, don't do these things. We bombed on these things. But the truth is, another community could try some of those things and have them really succeed. So my question is, how do we cross-pollinate? How do we have a sharing, sort of a skill share and a mind meld and a heart, an open-hearted dialogue about what we're excited about and what's working in our worlds?
let's talk quickly about the next generation. Are most of the kids, let's say under 18 that are there, homeschooled, or are they going somewhere off-site for education, or do you have your own education systems there?
Yeah, they're mostly homeschooled or something that's called unschooled, which is letting the children have a pretty, a rewilding relationship with the natural world and the adults around them. And generally speaking, unschooled and homeschooled kids are well ahead of their peers and all kinds of intelligences because they're around adults, they're around adult learning, they're applying what they're excited about right in the moment. They're not in an institutionalized setting. So there's homeschool groups and supplemental groups and all kinds of creative stuff happening with the kids. You can see our blog for those people who are more interested in that. You can check out the earthaven.org blog and specifically look for articles about the kids because there's some really amazing stuff happening.
And you're old enough, 25 years, that there's probably some second generation, right? People who have been born there and now are adults and are still living there. And I would assume that's a goal, right? To keep that sort of circumstance.
Yes, I mean, when kids hit the teenage years, their individuation process really requires them to have a peer group because that's how they start to identify. That's just human psychology, human development. And so a lot of times they will seek out. So we have a sort of a pack of kids who are teenagers and have had that throughout the years where they come together. And if they don't have that, it's less workable for them to be in community. They often have to move to a nearby town or do something different because the longing and the need for a peer group in the teenage years is so strong. Some kids have gone away and are, off in college or off exploring the world, as I think their lives have been small, right? Living in an eco-village, it's big in some ways and small in other ways, and so they sort of check out the rest of the world. But there are some young adults who are taking over parents' farms and taking over projects and stepping into some of the things they're passionate about in the community, and that's exciting too. I think in whatever way this life gives them a huge leg up on, I would say, emotional and relational intelligence, as well as practical land-based intelligence, and just they're more mature. They're just more integrated and more mature human beings.
One question from the audience here. Let me just get this, and I might paraphrase it a little. You mentioned about successful project sharing tractor, but you did have some unsuccessful projects that in hindsight could be solved differently. But did you? So the tractor being an example of a positive, is there something that you tried to put into a sharing mode that didn't work out so well, and now as you look back, you might do it a little different than you did?
Yeah, I might take those challenges a little bit broader instead of just a sharing component and just say some of the challenges we've had. And first I'll say, some of the great successes, aside from sharing a tractor, is we have learned so much over the years that we've been there, and we've really become adapted to place much more fully. Certainly not where we want to be, but way more adapted to place. We also have incredible social safety nets. We have, really there for each other when hard things happen. Like I had talked about, we had 5 deaths in over a 2-year period in the community, and people were just showed up. They show up for people's illnesses when someone has a baby, there's nothing like the kind of tight-knit community to be there for life's phases and stages. And there's just, nobody's gonna live on the street or go hungry in the community. Everyone's taken care of regardless of the situation. So that is a huge, huge success. I would say of the economic successes, and challenges, overall, we're finding ways to make it work economically. So I would just say there's lots of successes. Some of the mistakes that we've made along the way, some of the challenges, and I think I've mentioned a couple of these. For one, our ignorance, right? We came from urban and suburban environment. And wow, there's a lot to learn, right? Not knowing where our food comes from, or how to build shelter for ourselves, or how to work out our conflicts peaceably. All of that was like a big, steep learning curve. Also, we spread out in the landscape. I talked about that one, developing many different neighborhoods at once, like with a sort of settler or occupier mentality instead of moving from a controlled front. I think we would do that differently if we had to do it over. We've experimented with some building techniques that were either too labor intensive or ill-fitted for our environment, or both. I think some of us feel that living completely off the electric grid was a mistake, because power is one of those things we've had to struggle with for so long, and it's not that necessary in the scheme of what we're trying to accomplish. Another piece I'd say is we were super ambitious about the vision, and we burnt out a lot of creative people. Sort of the breadth of stuff we're trying to do, again, like governing ourselves and rethinking all kinds of relationships and all kinds of committees to do things. It takes a lot of energy to do all that. So the governance process we've made, we've had some really good successes, and we've also made some big mistakes. So those are just a few. We bought a piece of land that was almost entirely forested, and we live in the great southeastern forest, and it takes a lot of energy. It costs about $10,000 an acre to clear land, to do it in an ecologically responsible way, and to pay people living wages. And that is a lot of money to clear an acre of land, and a lot of time and labor and effort. So those things and more are some of the ways that we've learned a ton over the last 25 years.
That's awesome. Great answer. As it relates to, again, a little bit more about yourself as it relates to Earthaven, and maybe it's just maybe more broad, do you picture yourself being still at Earthaven 10, 15, 20 years from now, if you're fortunate to be alive then still? Or, or are there other adventures in a similar circumstance? And not just for you, what do you think the answer to that question would be for, the majority of the community? Do people see it as the place they're going to stay?
I think mostly people see it as a place they're going to stay. That's not always true. Life situations take people away all the time. Often a situation is, two divorced people, one of them moves to the community, the other person doesn't understand the community. There's always those sort of challenges, right? Navigating what kids need, navigating what extended family needs, moving away for a job. I mean, all of those things certainly happen, but there are a big core chunk of people at varying stages of life, starting in, I'd say, 30s, all the way up to 80s, that are there and that are settled and that have made their lives fully integrated in there. And everybody's got a unique story about that, but there's a lot of stability at Earthaven. Part of that is the economic model, where you have to sort of buy in and create your own infrastructure. So there's a lot of investment there. And also because I think there is a lot of satisfaction. People have a lot of agency, autonomy, as well as they can contribute, right? It's sometimes thought of as the greatest need of each human is to contribute. And there's nothing like community to feel like, yeah, I have a lot to contribute. In terms of my personal answer to that question, I actually straddle my life between Earthaven and Asheville. I live part-time in Asheville, which is this sort of nearby town. I took a full-time job with a sustainable ag nonprofit about 8 years ago, and worked as an executive director for a number of years. And I spend about half my time at Earthaven. So I have my own personal journey, which is I needed a bigger canvas, both creatively, professionally, as well as financially. And so I'm still engaged in both worlds, and that works for me. I'm in a pretty deep midlife journey where the vast majority of my adult life I've spent in rural land-based communities. And so now I'm doing a sort of deep long-term figuring out what my relationship to that is. And I'm still pretty deeply committed, and I'm a full decision maker with my neighborhood and with my community, and I help run a nonprofit within the community, and I'm deeply integrated, but I also have other things going on in my life. So I'm actually an interesting example of living a bit of a hybrid life.
Completely off the charts kind of secondary question, but I just thought of it, I'm going to ask it. I have a really good friend from when I was very young in graduate school who retired recently as a professor at the University of North Carolina, Asheville, and he was in entrepreneurism. And his name's Peter Heinemann. I just got to throw it out anyway. You know that name?
I don't think so, but maybe I'd have to look it up, but it doesn't ring a bell at the moment.
And you would remember him. Peter is a New Yorker, still carries it, even though he's lived in the South for 25 years, still has a very strong New York accent, and is a very visible personality guy. So you'd probably remember him. You probably haven't met him.
Yeah.
I was shocked when 25 years ago he said he was moving to the South. I didn't think that would ever happen. But anyway, let's say a person had invested in the community. They became immersed. They bought into the asset side of things 10 years ago, let's say. And now, for whatever reason, they wanted to do something different. Economically, would they be in a loss situation, neutral, or would they have made some money? You know, again, you buy a house, you most cases, you hope 10 years from now you could sell it and make some money, you know, and that's because that's probably the biggest asset you ever have.
Yeah.
What would the circumstances there be?
It's a good question. Let me just comment briefly on Mark's screen. Mark is on the School of Integrated Living, which is the nonprofit that does educational programs within Earthaven Ecovillage. And so SOIL is the acronym for School of Integrated Living. And on that website, you can find online and in-person classes. If people wanted to actually go to the website for the community itself, it's earthaven.org. And there's so much, a wealth of information on there, including a link to our YouTube channel, and, you know, years and years and years of blog posts, and all kinds of stuff to learn more, like specific membership information, visiting, online tours, all kinds of stuff on the earthaven.org site. So just to say, both of those sites will give good information, but the community itself is at earthaven.org. And to your question, it's a good question. Let's see, in my neighborhood, which is a common wall, sort of apartment condo style project, we have one building that's about 4,000 square feet and another building that's about 2,000 square feet. It depends on, yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into your question. But there's been someone in my neighborhood trying to sell a place for a couple of years, and there's a couple of levels of membership, right? So there's membership in the larger community, that is the Earthaven Association, and then there's membership in the neighborhood. So because there's multiple levels of membership, you can't really list the home, whether it's a condo style home or a single family home, you can't really list it on the open market, right? People need to funnel through and self-select into the community because they want to be there, right? It's not about real estate values so much. So generally speaking, people have been able to sell standalone single family homes a little bit easier because not everybody's interested in a common wall, co-housing neighborhood kind of thing. And I would guess that people are breaking about even. I don't know. It's a really good question. I'd love to actually have a spreadsheet of everybody who's built a home and then sold a home and like what did it take. But as you can imagine, when you build stuff from scratch, it's really quite expensive, right? You're doing earthworks, you're installing roads, you're doing a lot of land clearing. It's often hard to recoup that with the sales value of a home. So I think a lot of us in these first, let's say 50 years or even 100 years, are really doing a big service by contributing to the infrastructure creation in the community. And most of us aren't doing it in order to have a real estate value increase. Although I bet that's part of what keeps more people from investing in a project like this because it takes so much economically. So yeah, good question.
By the way, again, looking at the pictures of the residences that you all have, I mean, this is not living in tents, you know, and you know, temporary RVs spread out around the woods, you know, and such. I mean, it looks like it's very, you know, a similar to any kind of community in terms of the quality of the residences and such. So that it means they must have, over time, this is just me now opining, they're going to increase in value because it looks at least like you've built things there that have long-term asset value.
Yeah, I mean, maybe so. You know, it's a little hard to compare because Asheville, which is, you know, again, in the little town in the center of Western North Carolina, the real estate values are through the roof. Real estate agents can't even keep inventory in stock because Asheville is like on the 10 best places to visit and 10 best places to live. It's like inundated. Like the real estate market is crazy. And so nothing like that is happening at Earthaven. And in fact, in the early years, people did live in tents and in yurts and in huts. And, you know, in the early years, some of these little huts got built and then people made them into their permanent homes. And so some of them have challenging R values, you know, less insulation than we'd imagine. But as we've gone, we've developed a building style that is affordable and accessible in a sort of a stick frame house with certain kind of blown-in cellulose insulation and plaster exterior. And it's like we've gotten this formula down, and those houses are, yeah, really well insulated, really sturdy, and they have a lot of value to them. But like with all of green building, and certainly in our case with off-grid systems, everything is more expensive, right? And when you invest in paying your workers a living wage and the right livelihood component, things are more expensive because we're putting our money where our values are.
Yeah. Would, in terms of the community composition today versus what it was 25 years ago, has the median age shifted much, would you say? Is staying fairly similar?
Yeah. I love your questions. I feel like I need to get a statistical grid map. I actually want to know the answer to that question. And from like an intuitive place, like we counted recently, like we had 15 or so people over 70. Like, you know, it's a little easier to do the life when you have some kind of resources to rely on. And maybe it's even 20 people over 70. But one of the more hopeful things is that we often have young people in their 20s come through and do work trades and residencies and help out. And so there's a vibrancy and aliveness because we have lots of young people coming through. You know, people in their 20s aren't usually ready to commit to settle down, to, you know, invest in a big project. They usually use Earthaven as a stopping point on their travels. With like woofing, for example, which is willing workers on organic farms, which is an international movement that hooks people up with sustainable ag projects around the world. So we can be one of the stops on those places. But yeah, we have families all the time in their 30s, young families coming and staying and buying at Earthaven. So it seems to me like there is, without doing a statistical graph about it, it seems to me like there's a lot of flow.
Cool. Just let's talk about the kind of a community togetherness. How often do you think that sort of you or the average person there does things together with other community members, whether it's playing together, whether it's eating together, whether it's all those things in it that would be together, not work, you know, where it's life, just the living side of life.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where people fall on the spectrum of extrovert to introvert. But if I have a dear friend in the community who is what I call an extra extrovert, and she's out and about every minute of every day, nearly doing something. It could be a meeting or a work project, but it also could be playing soccer on the village green or going to a potluck or having friends over for dinner. Like it's really, you know, a day of however much want to be engaged, you can be engaged. And then there's other people who are introverts and pretty extreme on the introvert scale who don't engage as much. Yeah, anywhere that meets people's fancy is available.
By the way, I've had over 100 woofers, or there's another entity called HelpX that works internationally, and a third one called Volunteer Base. So I'm very aware of those folks. How many at any given time do you think you have that are there under a volunteer, short-term living situation? 10, 5, 1? What's about that number?
Yeah, good question. Maybe a dozen in the summer, and then another dozen that are renting short-term, like a 3 to 6 month rental, who are checking out the community. So a couple dozen people, something like that.
Okay. Because it's community related, got to ask this one. How has COVID affected, and what have you been more isolated and therefore more protected, or less so because you've got more amongst your little community, more togetherness? How is that situation been?
Well, bringing up the COVID question is a really great example of how, at Earthaven and in most communities, there is no single mindset about anything. You pick a topic, and I will tell you there's 100 people here and there's 100 different opinions about this topic. So COVID is a great example of that, because we have a whole spectrum of opinions about how to be with this situation. And anywhere along the spectrum that you can imagine is happening in the world is represented in the community. So we are not a unified voice on nearly anything. And that's a great example. So we did have some protocols that shut the community down for a while, and then we opened up for tours again, I guess in this past spring. And I haven't really heard much rumblings about, like, are we going to do any more shutdowns? Maybe, again, we have, like, when we try to make decisions for the whole, as you can imagine, there's some lengthy conversations that happen because you have to take all those perspectives and opinions down.
Well, I was taking it down more to what has happened. Have you had much COVID in terms of people getting sick, not just positive tests, people really seeing something from it, more than you would see from the flu in a typical season?
No, we have a pretty healthy group, more or less, and we haven't seen a whole lot of illness. There was one person very early on in 2020 that got pretty sick, a young person, and needed some oxygen, and took them 3 months, had sort of this long tail process afterwards. And then there was another little bout that went around, and then people were down for a couple of days, but more or less, no, it hasn't. There hasn't been significant impact of illness in the community, no.
Well, we are coming up to the top of the hour. This has been awesome. And again, as I said, I get asked questions forever, and I hope I can come visit sometime. I know you have a process of which you do that. I just see we've got home rentals even up here right now. But tell us whatever else you'd like to give out information-wise over these last few minutes. And audience, if you have it, ask some questions if you'd like to.
Yeah, so I'll just say some meta things, some big picture things, and then a couple of specifics, which is I think that where we're heading, if we want to look at the big picture where we're heading, is that we all need to return to the village. And that can look, a myriad of different ways: urban, suburban, rural, and specific to the people that are involved in the project. So I just am very supportive of people. Partly the reason I speak is to inspire people. Our mission is a living laboratory and educational seed bank for a sustainable human future. So if we can plant some seeds, if we can encourage some folks to get out there, to make some mistakes, to try this, I'd say, do it. It's so well worth it. The idea that we are here, being in community, to be stewards of the commons, and what I think of as the commons is everything that we collectively are responsible for, which is the air, the land, the water, and everything around us. So do it if you can, if you have the the resources, if you have the avenues to do it. I'll also say that, yes, come visit Earthaven, check out the website. Earthaven.org is the website. We do in-person tours every week. We do virtual tours pretty regularly. We have online programs, in-person programs, and it's just a great place to visit. And if it's not accessible, then visit a community that's doing something similar near you, because there are these all over the world. In addition to IC.org, there's also the Global Ecovillage Network, which can hook you up with what kind of eco-villages are in your region.
Did you say it was ifc.org or fic.org for the?
It's really just IC.org.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, again, Lee, this has been great fun. Again, my little intentional community here has not become what sort of I've liked from the people side. It's become more of what we wanted to be from the asset side. So I want to learn more from people like you about how we can make it work a little bit more on the people side, because I just think there'd be a lot more people who would love to be in places like we have, like you, like Earthaven is, and others. And again, we got to get them in urban, sorts of circumstances, more than we probably have seen them. There is one in Boulder, Colorado, right on the edge of Boulder, that's right at the edge of being rural, but it's urban, and that I think has worked pretty well. And I've looked at it a little. We haven't interviewed the leadership there recently. I think we're going to try to. But Lee, thank you very much. Audience, thank you very much. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Reed. Thank you, Sierra. Any questions you guys have for Lee real quick before we jump off?
Lee, I just wanted to thank you for coming on today. I'm so glad that we could make this connection and hopefully stay in touch. I'm just mind blown by the work that you guys are doing there. It's super inspirational. So thank you.
By the way, I would guess that the person in the bee-looking shirt in this picture is one of those extroverts in the community. Probably not an introvert.
Yeah. Good call. Yeah.
Mark or Reeve, anything else that you have?
Yeah. Thank you, Ari.
All right, Mark, why don't you go ahead and take us out? Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.